If you are a person who cares deeply and you sometimes find it hard to live in this world where so many bad things are happening, where there's so much suffering and seemingly unlimited bad news flooding in every day from all sides, then this conversation is for you, and I'm glad you found it. Because here I share my own story of how I used to suffer from a deeply cynical worldview and even went through severe depression for a long time. And I reveal how I worked my way out of this suffering step by step and completely changed my mindset. And what's more, these changes are not only huge night and day differences in what it is like to be me and how I perceive the world and how much I suffer, but also this change has been stable. And that is something that would have been unimaginable to me when I was in the depths of my depression. But here's the most important part. What I discovered is that it is the very same things that reduced my own suffering, that made my existence in this world more bearable and even peaceful and pleasant, that also made me a more effective agent in the world. For you, as someone who cares, this is incredibly good news. You do not have to choose between either seeing the world as it is and being cynical and depressed, or deluding yourself and being happy. What I'm sharing here is not based on delusion, it's not based on wishful thinking, and it's certainly not about forcing an optimistic perspective. It's about waking up, seeing things more clearly, and becoming a more effective part of the solution instead of simply continuing to suffer from the problem. The first half of this conversation is about my own story, my experience with depression and deep cynicism, and my rather strange journey out of that state of mind. And in the second half, we go into the pragmatic and practical steps I took to unwind my doomer mindset. If this is a problem you also suffer from and you're looking for a way out, here is a path forward. We've tried to answer all the questions and be as clear and practical as possible. So without further ado, let's get into it.
You've gone through depression. I've seen you right in the doldrums and really struggling and depressed. You've definitely faced this before where you feel like there's no escape and you feel like there's no way out. Was your depression triggered by kind of like this doomer mindset, or was it helped by this kind of doomer mindset? Yeah. Did it contribute?
I would not say that that was the only cause, but it definitely contributed. So at the time, I was really consuming a lot of, news content, mostly on Reddit, I think, following the kind of like world news and world politics. And I was also really worried about lots of stuff, climate change and things like how the attention economy is wrecking everyone's attention spans and destroying the youth, and things like economic debt spirals and the cost of living increasing and so on and so forth. And honestly, at the time, I could have given you a much longer, much more detailed list of all the things I'm worried about. I've forgotten most of it by now. And I was definitely spending a lot of time reading about these things, like learning about these things, worrying about these things, and talking about these things to other people. And that certainly was a contributor. My baseline feeling was that the world is a bad place and it's getting worse. And there's maybe nothing we can do about it. There's also a lot of blaming, it's like the corrupt politicians and the greedy billionaires and whoever else. There's all these evil entities that you can point to or that I would have pointed to as this is part of the problem. And there's a big thing of feeling like I need to do something about it, taking maybe too much responsibility or too much of a sense of I need to fix this problem somehow. I need to do something somehow. It's almost like that was already the baseline. And then more things happened, more problems mounted that then it's almost like eventually there's a breaking point, which is full on depression. That was my experience of this, yeah.
How did you arrive? Was it like a slow descending spiral type thing? I mean, how did you fall into this?
Yeah, I think it's a descending spiral that keeps accelerating, actually. I think that really the nature of online media makes it a lot worse, where you tend to, once you start watching, I don't know, you go on YouTube, you watch a video about climate change, you're going to see more videos about climate change, and generally you're going to see more and more disastrous predictions, right? because that obviously gets, someone saying, oh my God, it's much worse than you think, is going to get more attention, is going to get more engagement than someone who says, hey, no, maybe it's not that bad. And so it tends to create a spiral there where you're seeing content of escalating urgency and more catastrophizing. But also mentally, I mean, there's confirmation bias at play, right? We tend to notice things that confirm our existing beliefs. So the more you believe that the world is a bad place, the more evidence for this you will keep finding. And so it all compounds, right? It keeps getting worse. And I think that's also probably how something like that eventually turns into depression. It kind of, the spiral keeps accelerating, and eventually it's just like overwhelming. And it creates this total feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. I mean, depression is hard to put into words. You can't really understand what it's like unless you've experienced it. So if you don't know what it's like, that's great. I hope you never find out. But yeah, for sure. One of the things I wish I could have helped my younger, if I could go back and tell something to my younger self, I would try to get across that I was feeding my mind and using my mind in a way that is directly related to the results I was experiencing. So this doomer mindset, anxiety, depression, and so on, cynicism. And it's just like feeding and using your body. It's that reliable, right? Because if you think about, obviously my body changes depending on how I feed it and how I use it. And so if let's say I decided to have only pizza, just start eating only pizza, I would not be surprised to find that it leads to lots of negative effects, right? I would start feeling like bloated and heavy and sluggish all the time. And my skin would probably break out, and I would develop all kinds of problems, basically. My body would become less healthy. I would gain weight. I'd feel uncomfortable in my skin and so on, right? And then at the same time, if I also don't use my body a lot anymore, if I'm just sitting around, again, like, you wouldn't be surprised to find if I, several weeks into this experiment, if I tell you, oh my God, I'm feeling terrible, I'm always bloated, I can't sleep, my digestion is rubbish, I feel sluggish, brain fog, etc., right? You wouldn't be surprised. It's like, well, this is the consequence of how you're feeding and using your body, right? And I think we understand there's a very direct correlation, because the moment I stop the pizza diet and start eating a more healthy, varied diet again, immediately it feels different. Immediately my body starts healing. And I think I was just not aware that I was basically doing the same with my mind, and that it's just as reliable. I was just spending so much time feeding my mind with negative ideas and negative news, and also using my mind, first of all, letting it atrophy in some ways, just kind of taking in information without questioning it too much. But also what I was producing, right? So I was talking to other people about all the things I'm worried about and how the world is a terrible place and so on, right? So it's like I'm feeding and using my mind in such a way that the only possible consequence of that is feeling increasingly awful.
So it's an information diet rather than, a real physical food diet you're talking about here.
Yeah.
But I think, a lot of people will be surprised to hear that you've been through this, because you come across on camera and you definitely give an air that, you've got everything together, you've got your shit together, everything's good. But I've actually seen you, I'm obviously a very close friend and business partner of yours. I've seen you go through a lot of these battles. But to those that maybe aren't aware, why don't you just give a brief account of your journey into depression, just to set some context here?
Yeah. So a big part of it is what I already said, right? That there's just lots of rumination, lots of worrying about bad outcomes. And actually what was happening is I was spending most of my time worrying about the future. So even in the sense of where are you mentally? You can generally be in the future, in the present, or in the past mentally. When we're predominantly future or past focused, it leads to suffering. So the pattern could be that you're always ruminating on the past. Oh my God, this mistake I made, this thing I regret, Or maybe also nostalgia goggles on the past. Oh, things used to be so much better. or you're predominantly in the future, which was my pattern. I'm always thinking, oh my God, how do I prepare for the next thing? It's some combination of I have to do better, I have to somehow perform better in my business and so on in order to create a better future for myself. And also, I'm worried about all the things that could go wrong, constantly worried about potential negative future outcomes. I think my case was pretty extreme. I feel like I spent very little time in the present, actually experiencing what's here and now, because I was just living in the future and in a negative projection of the future. So that's generally unpleasant. And then as the depression itself set in, one interesting thing about this is that at the time when my really severe depression hit, it was like in my mid-30s, and we were running a successful business. I was financially independent. I was geographically, I had location freedom, right? I was living kind of nomadically. I was in a relationship at the time. I was in decent shape. I was pretty healthy. It's like all of these external factors, you could check all the boxes like this guy's living the dream. What more could you possibly want? And yet, that was the worst I've ever felt. And so I think that's also, I have a very vivid lived experience of there's no amount of success or money or freedom or whatever that fixes this problem. And yeah, look, what it ended up being is it's just hard to exist. In the depth of this, it's just hard to exist. Where it was hard to get myself out of bed. It was hard to get myself to do anything. I think I'm fairly good at forcing myself to do things, but I was just very ineffective. I ended up, that relationship I was in ended largely because of that depression as well. And, I remember, for example, I forced myself to go to the gym because I knew that exercising helps. And it does make a big difference for a lot of mental health conditions. And so I forced myself to go to the gym, which sometimes, I maybe managed to force myself to the gym twice a week or so. But what would happen, I remember this distinctly. I was at the gym, I was doing like a set of squats, I think. So I would do a set and then take a break, rest before the next set. And I would just, like 10 minutes later, I realized that I've been just like ruminating and stewing in my depression. And I kind of forgot, I forgot what to do next. And it ended up, this kept happening. Like every time I ended an exercise, I would just fall into this mode of like rumination. It's just, again, it's hard to describe. It's just everything feels heavy. Everything feels hopeless. There's constantly repeating loops about whatever is wrong. It's constantly repeating doom loops in my mind. And it ended up taking me like an hour to do 3 exercises or something. And it's just that the entire time it's like that. It's like, I don't want to wake up in the morning, basically, because waking up in the morning means I have to drag myself through another day of just feeling bad all day. Yeah, it's honestly a terrible place to be.
When you were in the gym doing these squats between exercises, what was going through your mind? Were you thinking about kind of like the world's problems, or were you thinking, what was it that was like keeping you down?
I think it was at the peak of depression, it became less about the world's problems, and it became more about all the ways I'm failing, all the ways I'm failing. And it becomes also it twists in on itself, because one of the things I'm failing at is I'm failing at healing my depression. I'm failing at getting better. I'm failing at being better and showing up, and basically I'm letting everyone down because I'm not productive in my business. I'm not showing up in my relationship and so on, right? So I'm letting everyone down, and that's part of the ruminating spiral. In general, my experience with suffering is that the more I suffer, the more like the narrower my world becomes, right? The more I suffer, the more everything becomes about me. But I think this also creates such a trap, because before I was deep in the depression, I was thinking about the external world a lot, and I'm thinking about the future a lot. And all of that was negative and worrying and difficult. And then as I suffer more and more, I start feeling, it starts becoming just about me and my suffering and how I'm failing and so on. And it's almost like there's no escaping it, because it's not like I can be like, oh, just focus on other things and you'll feel better. No, when I focus on other things, I just feel bad in a different way, So it's like there's no escaping it in a way. So I think that's also where a doomer mindset, a cynical outlook, can maybe keep you trapped in a depressive state for longer, because it's almost like you have nothing positive to return to.
What's the point, you know? What's the point? The whole world's going to end anyway. Everything's messed up.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I spoke to you about this before, you told me that to imagine having your hand constantly on fire. Like you're having a conversation with somebody and you're trying to focus, but it's like your hand is on fire all the time. And so it's like this constant pulling you away from being in the moment and constant distraction bringing you down.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, for sure, that's one of the things. It's like I wasn't present with people. I really struggled to be present with people. And yeah, exactly, because it's almost like the pain is just so severe that it's really hard to not just focus on the pain.
So we're going to talk about this doomer mindset in a bit more detail, and you know what you can potentially do to kind of catch that before it gets too severe. But for yourself, with your journey of depression, what would you say were the main things that help you lift yourself out of that state?
There are probably three contributing factors. One of them is maybe unsurprising, and is that one of the things I managed to force myself to do in that period is I managed to force myself to do meditation. And I just did more meditation. I did some long meditation sessions. And I also took a lot of pressure off. So I would do meditation sessions that are just like open awareness. You're not necessarily trying to focus your breath or something. It's almost like you just sit still for an hour and don't do anything. Just experience whatever you're experiencing. And I think that really helped. It helped create almost like a little gap in my awareness, between my mind and all the activity of my mind and me actually being, the realization that I'm not my mind, right? So I think that contributed. And then there was a very, very bizarre thing that happened. So, part of the story is that after trying different therapies and different approaches, none of it worked. I remembered reading about psilocybin studies, so psilocybin is the component in magic mushrooms, where I think in the 70s they did, and they've restarted this now after many decades of not doing the research anymore. But from the 70s, there was all this research where they had used psilocybin-assisted therapy for depression, and it is by far the most effective remedy we've ever found for depression. So I remember I was reading up on this, and I was reading up on the protocols, like how did they do this? And I went to Amsterdam, where one can legally get this stuff, and I essentially self-administered a therapeutic psilocybin session, which, nowadays you might actually be able to find a therapy-assisted, professional thing. At the time, this didn't exist yet. I ended up doing this, and this definitely helped. However, one of the very interesting things was that there was a dramatic moment of lifting the depression, which happened a day before I did the psilocybin. I've told this story before in one of my talks, where it's like I had this idea of, I just noticed that what would happen is a train of thought would come along, and I started noticing it's always the same kind of thoughts. It's, oh, here's the story about how I'm a failure and I'm letting everyone down. Oh, here's the story about how my relationship ended and all of my future relationships will end. Oh, here's the story about how the world is a terrible place and everything's getting worse. I was like, hold on, it's actually not that many thought loops. And I'm spending all day, okay, just to be clear, I'm spending all day ruminating on these thought loops. But it's maybe only half a dozen of them, and they just go on repeat, right? And I just had this curiosity. I was like, I wonder how often this happens. I wonder how often I get onto one of these trains of thought. And I had this app on my phone where you could just tap to count, right? You just tap on the app and it increases the count by 1. And so I just thought, I just out of curiosity, I wonder how many times a day do I get onto one of these rumination spirals? So I installed the app, and sure enough, a few minutes later, here comes the story about how I'm a failure. And I notice, oh, this is one of those. I get out the app and I'm about to tap, and then it's that action of paying attention to this is the train of thought I'm about to get on, and getting out the phone interrupted that loop. Because now all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe let's just not think about this. I already know where this is going. I already know the entire story that's about to go through my mind. Let's just not. And then that kept happening. I just kept noticing the train of thought and realizing that there's nothing new here. I've thought this 100 times already. And that act of noticing helped me not get on the train. And again, this is where I think the meditation probably also helped a lot. Okay, the meditation probably helped a lot to open that gap of awareness between my mind and my identity. So it was this most bizarre thing where just all of a sudden I was feeling great. All of a sudden I had just stopped getting on those ruminating trains of thought. And I think it shows that the problem is really confined to the mind. Because in my external world, things were basically fine, which is to say, of course, yeah, I was sad that my relationship had ended and my health had suffered and so on. Circumstances were not ideal, but here's the thing, circumstances are never ideal. My life circumstances were just normal life circumstances. And it's perfectly possible to be happy in normal life circumstances. And somehow this exercise just broke me out. It just broke me out. And then I would say that the psilocybin experience I had the next day, which was my very first drug experience of any kind ever. I had literally been sober for whatever it was, 35 years until then, was really profound and probably helped stabilize that, I think, because and it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell, what exactly caused what. What I can say is that ever since then, I've never been in that level of depression again. I think it definitely helped, but it's very interesting to see that a day before something profound happened, which also, much later in life, I started realizing that maybe time is not linear, and maybe that was an example of things happening in a non-linear fashion. But that's probably something we can get into at some later date when people have gotten more used to me talking about crazy stuff.
There is quite a bit to unpack there.
Yeah.
Okay, so the tapping on the phone thing.
Yeah.
That sounds very similar to CBT.
Mm-hmm.
Where you kind of, a thought pops up and you kind of interrupt it and you don't jump on it.
I don't think I had learned about CBT yet at that point. So, and what you're talking about is cognitive behavioral therapy, which tries to intervene at the thought level to change behaviors and outcomes. Yeah. I don't think I'd heard of that before, but yeah, I guess this is a bit of a cognitive behavioral thing. Yeah. You could also say that it's a mindfulness thing, right? It's a mindfulness thing. It's like noticing the thoughts in your mind rather than just being identified with the thoughts in your mind. And look, it's like the difference between being in the fishbowl or looking at the fishbowl. Or actually, my favorite analogy for this comes from, I think I heard Tim Ferriss say this, it's the difference between being in the washing machine versus being right outside of it, looking at the craziness of the washing machine.
Yeah, that's quite a good analogy. But the whole meditation practice opened up the other two things, I think, right? Because meditation for me, the one benefit I've got out of meditation is exactly the same as what you said. How you can kind of like see a thought, but you don't have to identify with it. And if you watch it for long enough, it just kind of disappears. And then another one comes along, and then you realize you're having thousands of these thoughts, and they don't mean anything. Just having the experience of watching thoughts arise and disappear, this too shall pass, is such a great learn, because I had no idea what I was going to pick up from meditation. Honestly, I was like doing it and I'm not even sure what I was going to get out of it, but that was the one key takeaway. I was like, you don't have to live by your thoughts. You don't have to jump on them.
It's fascinating, right, that we've known this for ages, right? That like there's such an ancient thing, such an ancient idea to do meditation. And it's really, one of the things, again, if I could go back and talk to my younger self, like for many, many years, I was doing different meditation practices, and I was stuck with it because I was treating meditation as a performance. I was trying to do it right. And I was basically efforting and straining too much. What I would tell my younger self is like, do way less, Like meditate and do way less. Like don't try to be good at meditation, first of all. Forget about that. Just sit there and see what happens. And if you just sit there and see what happens do it for an hour. That's initially very difficult, right? Because, oh my God, I'm going to get bored and so on. But like actually just sit there for an hour with your eyes closed and see what happens. It's really just that, just noticing, because in the span of an hour, you will realize how much stuff arises and passes. Everything that arises suggests urgency to you, you know? Oh, I can't be doing an hour meditation right now. I have to do this other thing. 5 minutes later, you've completely forgotten about it.
Yeah.
So you can see that there's there's the constant arising and passing of everything. Also feelings in your body. It's like, oh my God, it's so uncomfortable. 5 minutes later, you've forgotten about it. Oh my God, I'm so bored. 5 minutes later, you've forgotten about it. Everything arises, suggests urgency, and something needs to be done right now, and then it goes away. And the other thing is also an interesting question to ask is like, is this me? You know, this thought about, oh my God, I'm a failure, blah, 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 blah. Is this me? No. This is a thing that's arising in my mind. Am I the feeling of boredom? No. Am I this thought? No. Am I the discomfort in my left ankle? No. I am not these things. But it's, in a way, like, ask the question sincerely. But don't take my word for it. Like, feel the feeling and ask yourself, is this me? Is this me? For real, though. And it's such a bizarre thing. It's such a bizarre thing to experience. Everything arises and passes, and none of it is me.
It's absolutely remarkable. Like, how long would you say you were in your depressive phase for before this, like in one day, this thing that you did just pretty much lifted you out of it? Like how long? Like a year?
About a year, I think. Yeah, at least a year.
And it wasn't even something you were trying because you thought it would do anything. It was just out of curiosity.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is one of the things that also worries me about telling this story, is maybe it wouldn't work. If someone had told me, hey, do this thing, it's going to cure your depression, it probably wouldn't have worked. Yeah. Because I think part of what made it so powerful was just genuine curiosity. I was just curious, you know?
So look, we want to talk a bit more about practical tips that if somebody is in this situation where, you know, they're feeling really bad about their life, their prospects, and potentially in depression, what they can do. But before we go into that, you can't mention a psilocybin trip without telling us how that went. How was your experience?
My experience was great. It was a really good experience. Like I said, I'd never done anything that put me into a state of non-sobriety except sleep before then. And what I did is I was really, really deliberate about it. And, you know, for a long time when people asked me about anything related to psychedelics or plant medicine, I would tell them, like, okay, read these two books. There's a book called The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide by Richard Fadiman. Is it something Fadiman? And another book called Stealing Fire by Jamie Wheal and Stephen Kotler. I think those two books are great books to read to prepare for something like this. And also, anyone who's like, oh, I don't want to read two books, is like, okay, well then just don't do it. That would be my recommendation, right? I did a lot of reading. I read more books than that in preparation and really tried to get a sense of, like, how does one do this? Really try to understand the ideas of set and setting, you know, how your mindset and how you're setting your physical surroundings and so on will potentially influence one of these experiences. Also having a real willingness to be like, look, this might be terrible. You never know. This might be a bad experience, and being willing to have a bad experience if that's how it turns out. And also just like a long history, I have a lot of trust in myself, essentially. Because for most people, it's probably a bad idea to do this alone. I don't know. Again, I wouldn't do this prescriptively, right? But for me, I felt like doing it alone is the right thing. And so I prepared for this. I even did I cleaned up my diet a bit in the week leading up to it, which is associated with other types of plant medicines. But again, just kind of trying to get myself in the right mind state. I really had a clear intention going in. I had clear questions going in and so on. And I followed the protocol of taking a relatively high dose and listening to classical music. I'd prepared a playlist for this with an eye mask. And just like lying on a couch in a comfortable environment, listening to this thing and just letting it play out, right? And the experience was beautiful, hard to put into words. One of the things it did is it gave me a perspective on myself that I think of as the ideal parent to child perspective. So if you imagine an untainted relationship from a parent to a child, where it's just pure love. I just love you so much. I support you so much. And like, of course, you're going to make mistakes and mess up and so on. Like, how else are you going to be alive, right? Obviously, all the time as a child, you're going to do things wrong, quote unquote, right? You're going to fall over many times before you ever learn to walk. You're going to knock things over because you're clumsy initially. You're going to make all kinds of mistakes. Things are going to break. Things are going to get dirty and messy. It's like, none of this is ever a problem. Like, of course this is going to happen. And if anything, I love you more for all of your, for all of your failed attempts and reattempts. And it gave me this kind of perspective on myself. I could see myself like that. I'm just like, oh, wow. Yeah, there's all of the stuff that I feel like isn't good enough about me. All of the stuff I criticize myself for, all of this is completely fine. I also then spent a lot of time like recording voice notes and writing and journaling and so on to really try and capture the experience or really try and not let the experience go to waste. And I'm saying all this because most people encounter these types of substances in very different contexts. Maybe you're at a party and someone hands you a thing and says, oh, try this, it's going to be great. And then you might have a good experience, you might have a terrible experience. And chances are you don't walk away with much benefit, essentially, because you were already like disoriented. You're at a party somewhere, you have the people there you don't know. You're maybe having partially a good experience, maybe also at times you feel totally lost and terrible and so on. And then the next day you're kind of glad it's over. And the way I approach this is really very, very different. It's really therapeutic, where the whole thing is carefully designed to be therapeutic, right? The success rate, the chances of getting something good out of it if you do it like that is high. And I also think that the fact that I'd already done like a decade plus of very deliberate introspective work and self-development and so on definitely helped.
So what was it like then? So you've had this year where you've had a really bad year, possibly one of the worst of your life, would you say?
Yeah.
It was that bad. And yeah, you started doing some meditation and you did this trip. Obviously, you did a bit of CBT without actually knowing it was CBT. The next day, waking up, or was it just like the first day of the rest of your life then? I mean, was it really like that? Things were just clearer and...
Yeah. I think initially there was also a bit of worry about, is this going to last, Like, okay, I'd been feeling better for 2 days. But what if I wake up and I'm all depressed again? So I think it probably took a while before that fear dissipated. But yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember waking up the next day and just feeling there's still so much to process. I'd spent a lot of time just like writing and going for walks and just really letting this land on me. And I'd also had some insights that really changed the course of my life, where I could basically see how certain things I had been doing up until then were a dead end. One of those things was that up until that point, I had been totally performance focused. So, and this comes from my background of, when I was young, I had the experience of like being a failure at everything. I really struggled with life and across the board, I really struggled academically, I struggled socially, I didn't have friends, or I had trouble making friends. I always had trouble with my love life. I felt like I was so unattractive and so on. And I'd gone through this period of being totally lost and broken. At some point I had this moment of getting fed up and deciding I need to fix this. And that's what got me into self-development. And I just went after that so hard. My conviction was essentially, look, I'm destined to be a failure, so I have to work 10 times harder than anyone else to have a chance of succeeding. And my whole outlook was, I need to spend all of my time and energy just optimizing. I have to optimize my habits and my health and my mind and my productivity. And my whole life was like in service of this. And I treated everything like that. For my business, it's like I need to build the right skills, learn the right things, and then implement to build a successful business. But it's the same for like my social life. Oh, why can't I get a girlfriend? Okay, I need to understand social dynamics, right? I need to understand what makes a man attractive. I need to maximize those things. I need to learn social skills. I need to do, right? I need to practice these skills, make myself better to solve this problem. And then health as well. How do I optimize my diet? How do I optimize my routine? How do I optimize everything? And obviously this is hard work. It's very hard work to be spending all your time, because for me it was like you're spending all your time either sharpening the axe or chopping. Those are the only two acceptable things to do, which is a bit exhausting. What this experience made me realize is that this was a treadmill going to nowhere. Because if you zoom out a little bit, what is the point of all this optimization and improvement and so on? Well, I'm trying to better myself, and I'm trying to ideally make a positive difference in the world somehow. I want to create a better future for those who come after me, just like those who came before me created a better future for me. Very successfully, I might add. Something I'm very aware of is how unbelievably easier, more convenient, and more luxurious my life is compared to my grandparents' lives. And I want to be part of that. I'd ideally like to contribute to a better world in the future. But if the next generation is just going to be spending all of their time sharpening the axe and chopping and building a better future for the next generation, who will spend all their time just sharpening the axe and chopping and so on, then what's the point? What's the point of all this? Like, there's no one here to enjoy it. Everybody's too busy torturing themselves to try and build a better world. And there's no one there to enjoy the better world. So I just had this realization, like, okay, for this to make any sense, obviously I can decide I'm going to be the martyr, and it's not about me, it's only about other people. But again, like, that's the example I'm setting. Other people are liable to do that too, right? Or at least if I have children, then they are probably going to do what I demonstrate, right? So the whole project only makes sense if there's some time to actually enjoy the fruits of your labor, if there's some time to just be, to just exist and enjoy existence itself as it is. And that was a huge, huge difference that really changed the trajectory of my life, that insight. I think this also relates to the problem of the doomer mindset, because it essentially says you're allowed to enjoy yourself, and you're allowed to enjoy yourself even if the work is not done yet. So even if you haven't become perfect yet, right? You haven't optimized yourself to perfection yet, and you haven't achieved perfection in your business, in your health, in your whatever yet, it is good and necessary to enjoy yourself as you are right now, because the work is never going to be done. It is never going to be done. That is actually the point. We hope it's never going to be done, because the only way the game ends is when you lose, right? We're trying to play an infinite game. Again, I'm zooming out to like the purpose of all this. The purpose of all of my work, all of what I'm doing, is to contribute to the project of humanity, which is to continue human existence. If we do this well, thousands of years from now, humans will still exist, and they will have infinitely better lives than us. And as part of that project, you're supposed to enjoy the time you have here and now.
It's fascinating when you extrapolate out, when you realize actually, what is the point of all this? You know, we're so focused on our daily rigmarole and you know, the latest doom scrolling on your feed and whatnot. But when you zoom out, it's like, oh, there's a bigger thing at play here.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, so far, I really wanted to touch on your story. I really wanted to go into that because it kind of gives more credibility that you've been through this and you've suffered potentially more than most from this very thing we're about to talk about, which is the doomer mindset. So now what I'd like to do is we haven't properly kind of defined what we mean by doomer mindset. Let's define it, and then let's talk about what people can do if they find themselves in this position.
So a doomer mindset is, like we've mentioned, it's pre-depression. It's not necessarily what happens when you're in a depression, or maybe it's more like a low-grade depression, where you are just spending a lot of time worrying about the state of the world. And it can be worrying about the state of the world at different levels. So it can be globally, oh my God, climate change is going to kill us all, AI is going to kill us all, something worse than COVID is going to kill us all. All these bad things are happening, right? And oh my God, here, some country voted an idiot into office and they're going to nuke us all and so on, right? It's like constantly stuff happening on a global scale that's worrying and bad. And the wrong people are in charge and oh my God, everything's bad. And then it can be more local, like, oh, the housing market is terrible. I can't afford a house. There's too much unemployment. There's too much, something is going wrong more locally, that you also maybe feel, oh, everything's getting more expensive. This is difficult. Things are bad, right? And then even more locally, it's maybe like worrying about your health. Oh my God, this thing I'm eating is going to give me cancer. This kind of thing, right? But the thing is, it's just a consistent focus on everything that could potentially go wrong. And it's the perception that the world is a bad place. Things are bad. Things are bad and they're getting worse. So we're talking about beliefs here. And the thing is, beliefs do not feel like beliefs. Beliefs feel like your perception of reality. So a doomer mindset is when you go, the world is actually factually a bad place. Things are actually for real getting worse. The only reasonable position an awake and aware person can have is one of extreme worry and anxiety because things are bad. And anyone who doesn't see this is delusional and wrong. And I should not be one of those people. I would say that's a doomer mindset.
And I think one of the characteristics of a doomer mindset is that it kind of feeds on itself, like you were saying earlier. If you don't catch it early, and like you say, you believe everything to be real. This isn't like this might happen. This is the case. This is the case with the world. It kind of feeds off itself, so that the more you interact with that idea, the more mind share it takes, the more exposure you get to it, the more it feeds off itself. It gets worse and worse until you can't think of anything else.
Yeah, exactly. It's really a spiral, right? It's a spiral that just keeps getting worse.
But I think one of the really punishing things about the doomer mindset, and one of the things that I think people need to, if they're not already, be aware of, is it's one of the modern day traps of society. Yep. It's like fast food or sugary drinks or advertising. What you might not necessarily be aware is that tech companies now actually stand to gain from profiting on your fear, on your negative emotions, because that's what encourages you to click on feed items, to click on news items, to pay attention to something, because it triggers your anxiety.
Anyone who has this problem and is open to maybe escaping it, one of the things I would consider, and I also encourage you to do your own research on this, find your own conviction here, is to consider okay, one of the things that we know about the human mind is that there is a negativity bias. So we notice negative things at a higher valence, more intensely than positive things. We know this and it makes sense. And this has been studied, for example, if you look at the emotional intensity of losing $10 versus gaining $10, losing $10 feels more bad than gaining $10 feels good. It's not a neutral, which you might expect that it's neutral, but it's not neutral. And this is true across the board, and it does make sense in evolutionary terms, because if I pay more attention to potentially negative things, basically your ancestor who was worried about a tiger in a bush that wasn't there survived, whereas your ancestor who wasn't worried about a tiger that was actually in a bush died, right? So it kind of makes sense that being a little too nervous in a way about potential dangers would increase your survivability, even if it's not good for your mental health. So we know this is well studied. There is a negativity bias. And because of the negativity bias, any platform that is optimizing for engagement has an incentive to serve negative content, or to serve content that creates negative emotions. It doesn't have to be an evil algorithm. If you just go, okay, I'm in charge of the Facebook algorithm or whatever, and I just go, I want to make sure that people spend more time here, click on more stuff, so they end up seeing more ads, that will automatically end up serving more negative stuff than positive stuff, simply because of the negativity bias. What we also know is that there's a thing called hedonic adaptation. And hedonic adaptation is that anything that is positive, anything that is great in your life, if it consistently keeps happening, you get used to it. this is the Louis C.K. joke from ages ago, where he was talking about how, he was on a flight and for the first time ever there was Wi-Fi available on the flight. And then half an hour later it stops working. And the guy next to him goes, this is bullshit. Right? So now you're upset about not having something that you didn't even know existed an hour ago. And that's hedonic adaptation, right? It's like you go, wow, that's so cool, I have Wi-Fi on a plane. And then you immediately get used to it. And now you take it for granted. And it's the same reason why you get into a new relationship. Maybe you've been single for a long time. You go, oh my God, if only I wasn't so lonely. You get into a new relationship. Initially, you're so happy about it. But then before you know it, your partner might be amazing, but you're just taking it for granted. You're taking it for granted that you're not alone. You're taking it for granted that they do nice things for you. Same reason why you go, oh my God, I bought an exciting new car. It's so much better than my old car. And then soon after, it's just your car, right? So hedonic adaptation, also a real thing, which means that all of the great things in your life, you basically just get used to, you take them for granted, you don't notice them anymore. Now, if you combine these two things, what would you expect would happen in a world that is neutral? Imagine that you live in a world where objectively, as many good things as bad things happen any given day. What would happen? You would be seeing bad news all the time, right? You'd be seeing bad news all the time and you'd be convinced that things are bad simply, and this is just two simple, well-studied facets of human psychology. In fact, even if the world is objectively a good place, and let's say 60% of the things that happen are good, 40% are bad, you'd probably still see more bad news than anything else. Mm. And I think that's worth considering.
Yeah, from the context of, if you're browsing Instagram or Facebook or one of these social media platforms, realize that you're playing a game there. And you're playing a game against some very, very high paid data scientists whose job it is to keep you addicted to that platform as much as possible through whatever means.
They're so good at it.
They're extremely good at it, and they understand these psychological biases and they play into it, and it is their sole job to make sure you don't leave that platform. And also understand that there's a conflict of interest between what's good for them, what's good for the platform, and what is good for you. And there's no interest on their behalf to make sure that your emotional well-being and your mindset is in a great state, as long as you interact with the platform and you click on ads.
Yeah. And also think about, in fact, if anything, it's better, because a lot of advertising, look, an easy way to sell something is to create pain and then sell a solution to that pain, right? So if I say, hey, here's a thing that'll make you a little bit healthier, buy it, you go, whatever. If I say, you are fat and ugly and you're going to die, and here's a solution, then it's like, oh shit, I need this. I'm saying this in a very on-the-nose way. And basically a lot of advertising functions exactly like that, just way more subtly. So it's actually good for the business if you're scrolling, and you keep feeling worse about things, because then here's a solution that you can buy hits harder. So, and another thing is, if you're thinking, well, I'm scrolling through Instagram, I'm seeing people's like lifestyle updates and fitness content and whatever. So how does this apply to me? Even there, like, think about, the problem is the negativity bias, is that you might be scrolling through fitness content, let's say, and there's a positive aspect to this, which is like, this is interesting content. I'm looking at beautiful people, this kind of thing, right? But there's also a negative aspect to this, is this person is in better shape than me. This person is in better shape than me. This person's life is better than mine. And the negativity of that outweighs the positivity. So even if you're not scrolling doom news, you're still exposed to this problem.
Yeah, so I think that the point is you can live your life, especially nowadays with social media, with the digitization of everything. 30 years ago, maybe you'd get exposed to this negativity through a newspaper stand that you walk past on the way to work like twice a day or something like that. But now with technology, with social media platforms, it's just everywhere. And it can feel like the world is literally falling apart. And what we're trying to say is there's a reason for that. There's a reason it feels like that. And it might not necessarily be that the world is falling apart.
And it's also kind of a reasonable thing. Like, if this has happened to you, and if you have a mostly negative mindset and you have these problems we've been talking about, it's actually it's not a personal failing. It's actually fairly reasonable. I remember when I came to visit you in Manila, in the Philippines, a few years ago, and it was the first time that I'd spent a longer time in Manila. Manila is probably one of the worst cities I've ever experienced. One of the reasons for it was what I noticed. I feel like it was the first time in my life that I experienced a food desert, where there is fast food chains on every corner. There's like 7-Elevens everywhere where you can get all kinds of, packaged like cakes and cookies and all kinds of junk food. But I had the hardest time finding any kind of real food. I ended up going to the same place every day. There was like one place where they made you salads that were drenched in way too much mayo, but you could also tell them, hey, make me the salad with these ingredients and don't add a ton of sauce. That's where I ate every day, because it's like the only place within walking distance I could find that served real food. Unsurprisingly, you look around there, almost everyone's overweight. People do not look like they're in good health. And it's like, well, of course, if in this environment, it is so easy to eat bad food, it's so hard to eat good food, you would expect people to be unhealthy from a diet perspective, right? And I feel like this is basically what's happening with the information landscape. If you're just behaving normally, as a normal person, you're eating the food that's available to you. You're consuming the information and entertainment that's available to you. Unfortunately, that leads to really bad outcomes. And it's like you have to deliberately counteract the force of your environment in order to protect your health, both physical and mental.
Yeah, that's such a great analogy. I hadn't thought of that. But I think, with this awareness of the game that's being played, it just brings a healthy dose of skepticism to anything that you see. Like, I don't know, have you ever been to Market Watch? They talk about the stock market and investments like that. Every time I go on that site, it's like somebody predicts like a 20%, the biggest crash of the century or something like that. It's like literally, and then the next day it will be like stocks ready to rally like 500%, Nvidia off the charts, blah, blah, blah. It's just ridiculous. And it's like the biggest example I can think of how they don't care what's being published there. They have no idea what's going on with the markets. It's just get clicks and make money.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's so obvious on that site, but actually it's a wider problem than that. Like a YouTube thumbnail that says why you're going to die of cancer is just way more concerning. I've got to click on that and find out why I'm going to die of cancer than a positive story. And that's just the nature of human mind.
Yeah. One of the things that I've come to use almost like as a mental shortcut for myself is that I remind myself that what I'm doing is I'm not learning information. I am consuming a genre of entertainment. So oh my God, the economy is in danger, the stock market is about to crash, is a genre of entertainment. And also a lot of, something I see from Quit by Healing, I see a lot of like the manosphere discourse and the dating discourse and so on. There's so much content about dating and the disastrous state of dating and so on. It's not true. It is a genre of entertainment, and you can find, there's a Substack called the Nuance Pill that looks at like a red pill and black pill beliefs and investigates them. And it's like, it's completely uninteresting. This blog is incredibly uninteresting because it just always finds like, well, no, it's not true. The stuff that they're saying is not true. The data is misinterpreted. Reality is more complex and less interesting,
Yeah.
And so
exactly, nobody wants that.
But the danger is that you consume this content and you think, I am learning important things about the world. No, you're consuming a genre of entertainment, which in that case, dating discourse, manosphere stuff is basically outrage content, right? Like be outraged at all these evil women who are whatever, or be outraged at the biology that dictates that everyone's miserable or whatever it is. But it's always about how angry you can be at something. And it's pure entertainment. It's pure entertainment. It's just tragic when you treat it as something else.
Because the advertising industry is a game of polarization, and that's what it feeds off.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to learn more about this, there's a book that I read quite a few years ago, which actually prompted me to delete Facebook. I haven't been on Facebook for years, and Instagram as well, because I'd realized it really wasn't serving me. 10 Reasons to Delete Your Social Media Accounts Right Now by Jaron Lanier.
Yeah.
I think you read that one as well, right?
Yeah,
The
it's a good
engineer.
book. Yeah.
So he was an engineer from within Google, I believe. And he kind of blew the lid off what really goes on
Yeah.
these
It,
platforms. It's a good read.
yeah, I agree. It gives you a good perspective again of, there's almost like a parallel to what we talked about with the mind before. You have all this content in your mind, and meditation helps you realize, hold on, this just keeps happening, and this isn't me. It's almost like you start seeing the game your mind is playing in a way, right? And without being so caught up in it. And I feel like this is what we're talking about now is the same with media, where you go, instead of being caught up in the washing machine of media, if you can realize, oh, wait, this is an algorithm that's trying to do a certain thing. This is content creators that are creating a certain thing because it gets attention. This is actually, none of this is optimized for truth or usefulness. If you can have that perspective, it really changes a lot.
Putting that to one side then, that's the first thing to be aware of, the incentivization of advertising media in a digital age. The second thing, Shane, that you spoke to me about the other day was just how bad people are at predicting things.
Yeah. For me, that was also, I think that changed a lot about my doomer mindset, actually. And there's a book called Super Forecasters. I can't remember the author's name anymore, but Super Forecasters is this book about forecasting, about making predictions. And, you were talking about before where you can go to MarketWatch and it'll tell you, oh, the biggest economic crash of all times is around the corner. And then that doesn't happen. And nobody cares, right? And they have some other headline the next day. So what's happening there is people are constantly making predictions. And it turns out those predictions are constantly wrong. But somehow we don't update our priors. We don't go, oh, wait, this is always wrong. Instead, we see the latest headline and we get the emotional spike of fear and worry and so on. So Super Forecasters, first of all, makes the case of let's look at people who make predictions, such as people who write for news websites, people who appear as pundits and experts on news shows and things like that, right? Let's look at people who make predictions and measure how accurate they actually are. And it turns out that the vast majority, almost everybody who shows up as an expert in various formats and makes predictions has an absolutely awful track record. Often worse than random, worse than just random predictions. An example of this is Jim Cramer, quite famously, who talks about stocks, and who is so systematically wrong that you can now invest in an inverse Cramer index. So it's a fund that will always do the opposite of what Cramer suggests. And this fund
is doing really well.
It's doing great. Okay. So
Jim Cramer he's on TV, right?
I think he's on CNN or something. I mean, I don't know if he still is, but he's like one of the big names. He has a show about stocks and making predictions about stocks. And it doesn't matter how wrong he is and how often he is wrong. He's the expert, right? It doesn't matter. And this happens all the time. And of course, you can also, and this is what a lot of experts also do, is they will hedge and rationalize, they will maybe hedge their statements instead of making a clear prediction so that they have plausible deniability. But also, you say A is going to happen, then B happens. And the next time you're on the show, you go, oh, well, it's because of this and that and the other. So it kind of makes it seem like you're less wrong than you were. But if you're just really strict on what did you predict, what happened, the track record experts have is terrible. The second thing that this book opened my eyes to is when it comes to what they call super forecasters, which is some people, very, very few people, are good at making predictions that actually have some level of accuracy. And it goes into what that takes. And it just shows that it's an incredibly complicated process. It is a probabilistic thing. So people don't say this is going to happen or this is not going to happen. People say, there's a 60% chance that this happens within 5 weeks and a 80% chance that it happens within 7 weeks or something like that. And It requires constant updating. It requires, it's like so much goes into the process of creating a single prediction that doesn't completely suck. And even the people who are incredibly good at this, even the superstars of prediction, are pretty much unable to make any accurate prediction that goes beyond about a year in the future. So that is something that opened my eyes to this, where I'm like, oh, how often do I hear someone confidently make some kind of a prediction and I immediately buy into it? And again, I might get the emotional, now I'm super worried about it and so on. And by the time that prediction is proven wrong, I've long forgotten about it and I'm worried about something else now. And so I can be in an endless loop of worrying about stuff that never actually happens. And I don't even realize that that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, and the worst thing is you can be in an echo chamber of other people who are also on the same train as you. So then you get like this confirmation bias that feeds on, everyone else is this is real. The climate, climate change is real.
Yes. And even, with something like, okay, with climate change, climate change is real. I do think that humans cause climate change. I think there's a lot of evidence for that and so on and so forth. And there's reasons to be worried. But within that topic, there's constantly predictions being made that end up not coming true. And also within that topic, there's constantly good news happening that you don't hear about because you're busy consuming all the bad news, right?
And they don't get any attention anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, to get back to super forecasters, one thing that my conclusion that I came out of with this, and I think this is really worth taking on board. Right now, we live in a world where there is a market for everything. And it's accessible to basically anyone. So whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, if you have a smartphone and an internet connection, you can participate in global markets through a brokerage account, through various crypto platforms where you can even participate in this stuff without having to have like a bank account and stuff like that, without KYC. There's a poly market, there's these prediction markets where directly and indirectly you can put money on predictions. So one way to do it is you can like directly say, whenever there's an election coming up, there's going to be a market where you can bet on which candidate is going to get elected. And if you're right, you make money. But also indirectly, if you can predict that a war is going to break out somewhere, there's probably some commodity that you can either long or short, You can be like, well, if these countries go to war with each other, then the price of copper is going to go through the roof, or the price of oil is going to crash or something. So there's a market for everything. And the reason I'm saying this is because anyone who is good at making predictions can make tons of money very quickly. And this is one of the internet lore things that I saw firsthand, which is really astonishing. On Twitter, there is an account which is now long inactive. It was called Gigantic Rebirth. Gigantic Rebirth was an account that was talking about crypto markets, but also other predictions. And this guy was so good at making predictions that he had to stop posting because people caught on to how good he is. This guy's track record is crazy good. And he had to stop posting because he would move markets with his predictions. And just as a sample, this guy predicted that Donald Trump would get reelected after he got booted out. He predicted this 4 years in advance. And loads of other stuff. This guy, like I saw this account while it was active, it was absolutely mind-blowing. And just to give an example, like someone tracked down one of his crypto wallets. And in the span of a year, this guy ran an account up from a few thousand to over 1 billion. Just by making accurate predictions. And the reason I'm saying this is that if anyone is making confident predictions about future outcomes and they're not unbelievably wealthy, that means they're probably wrong. Anyone who's good at this can get absolutely wildly rich, okay? And this has changed a lot for me because very often you have someone who's, again, they're talking confidently about the terrible things that's going to happen next. And you just go, well, and who are you? If you were any good at this, you could be so damn rich, but you're just some average person, right? It's just armchair politics.
So yeah, it's just another layer of skepticism for what you consume online.
Yeah.
So the first point is the advertising negativity bias. And the second point is that people are just generally really bad at predicting things. So take what you read and what you consume with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yes.
But
And
also, I remember Shane,
yeah,
sorry, Karen.
one more thing I want to add here is you can also apply this to yourself. Because think about the things that you're worried about and then formulate them as a bet that you can put money on. And go put money on it. Because it's one thing to be vaguely afraid of, oh my God, everything's going to get bad soon. It's another thing to say, okay, there is going to be whatever, there's going to be a major outbreak of something that's going to cause something within the next 6 months. Put money on it. And the moment you have to do that, you have to, it clarifies your thinking. Because you're like, hold on, what exactly am I worried about? How do I formulate this as a bet? Because you can, like I said, there's a market for everything. You can put money on it. And then also the moment you go, okay, I'm going to put $1,000 on this, you're suddenly like, how sure am I actually about this? How sure am I about this? So for me, this insight has helped me also be skeptical of my own ideas. I might have something running in my mind, but if I go, okay, how much money am I willing to put on this? All of a sudden, I'm not that sure anymore.
One way you can be skeptical about your ideas is actively looking for people or books or information that are coming at this from the opposite angle.
Yeah, which is also something I did really deliberately. I started reading books that gave that basically questioned my perspective. And what's super interesting is I could see that, if I read 3 books about, I don't know, climate disaster and how everything's getting worse, then I can see how that changes my mind and I get so worried about it and I'm so convinced that everything's over. But then if I read one book that's arguing pro and one book that's arguing against, and both of them are, well researched and well written, I can see how that affects my mind, because now all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, this is not as black and white as I thought it was. And actually that's all it takes. It's not, for me, the remedy to being convinced that everything is bad and getting worse is not convincing yourself that everything's actually good and fine and getting better. It is simply recognizing that I don't know. I just don't know. And one of the things that reading opposing views has taught me is that things are just way more complicated. Things are way more complex than I can really process, to be honest. If you'd asked a younger version of me about this, I would have probably at some point said that capitalism is mostly bad. Right? Capitalism encourages greed, it encourages exploitation, it comes with so many issues. It's mostly a bad thing. And nowadays, I would say that capitalism is probably mostly a good thing, but it's not because I'm convinced it's the best thing ever. It's just that I've realized it's so complex. And capitalism has so many negative externalities and so many positive externalities. It's so complicated. It is so incredibly complicated that it is hard for me to say that it's just categorically a bad thing. And it's very hard for me to say that, what will we replace it with? A younger version of me was naive enough to say, this is bad, we should eliminate it and replace it with something better. Now I'm saying, you know what? It definitely comes with many downsides, but I have no idea what we would replace this thing with. And that also, the lack of conviction really makes me worry less about it. And it's not the same as deluding myself. It's not the same as deluding myself into trying to believe the opposite.
So another thing that I think is worth mentioning, because I've also had bouts of hypochondria. You remember when we were in Budapest working together, and I absolutely completely lost the plot. And I was suffering from all of this as well, where I was listening to negative influences and they were kind of feeding my brain with such negativity. I thought the dollar was going to implode about 20 years ago. I mean, I had all these beliefs where I thought there's just no point. And on top of this, I believed I had some really bad health condition, which I ended up not having. And one of the things that really helped me is that I started to write down all these things that I believed to be true, and then kept a record of how many were true. And I didn't finish this exercise because it basically became a bit of a joke, because before I was looking at this list and it was like, this is ridiculous. All of these things that I was catastrophizing about. I thought I had some kind of cancer about 3 separate times on this list. I know it sounds funny me saying it now, but to me at that time, it was real. I was convinced. I was seeing doctor after doctor. I was getting scans done. They knew me by first name. I was there all the time. But then at some point I had to look at this list and just be like, okay, look, something is clearly isn't right here, and the problem is actually me.
Yeah. And I think it's very important, like you said, it feels real, right? At the time you're writing down these things, it feels totally real. And I want to acknowledge that again, that's what it feels like. It doesn't feel like you have hypochondria. It feels like my health is in the dumps and it's getting worse.
And nobody understands.
And nobody understands, right?
That's what, yeah, no one takes me seriously. Like the doctor, I would sit down with them for like half an hour and they would try and convince me the whole time everything was fine. But I'll come out, I need to see a different doctor. They don't get it.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the same spiral applies, right? Once you start looking up health symptoms online, it's all over basically.
Oh, that's game over for sure, yeah.
So, and I think I love that because again, you're just bringing awareness to it. You're just, you're making it clear instead of vague. I think that the 2 elements here that I would recommend everyone try out. Bring more clarity to it, because the moment you have to write it down in the form of a prediction, you have to be so much clearer, because it's one thing to say, oh my God, everything's getting bad. I feel bad. My health is bad. You can be vaguely worried about that infinitely. But if you write down, okay, what exactly is going wrong? What do I feel is happening? And then you go, okay, I think I'm developing this kind of cancer. I think I have an ulcer. I think I have this. I think I have that. Okay. So now you've made it specific. And that also makes it testable. And then it just naturally leads to skepticism if you keep being wrong. You can't take your mind's next suggestion of what is terribly wrong as seriously if the last 10 predictions have been wrong.
What that actually taught me was that I was wasting so much energy and mind share on stuff that I didn't actually have any clarification on. That I decided then and there that it's not that I won't ever worry about anything, but I won't ever worry about anything that I am not 100% sure is actually thing to worry about.
Right.
That was my takeaway.
Yeah. And it was similar for me with, things like climate change worries, where I was most worried about it when I knew the least about it, which is also the problem of entertainment media, because the most entertaining thing is just like shock horror pictures of billowing smokestacks with very little information. Whereas the more I actually go, okay, how much of this do I understand? How well could I explain what is going on to someone else? And the more I research into it, the more complicated things get, which again, it doesn't mean that the conclusion is everything's fine, it's just so much more complicated than I thought. I'm much less sure about what's happening than I thought. You uncover so many things where it's like, oh, actually, so many solutions are being put into place. Some things are getting better. It's not like we are simply plummeting off a cliff, which is what I was convinced of before. The more information I add, the more I realize how little I know. And the more I realize how little I know, the less confidently I'm worried about specific future outcomes.
Have you ever heard somebody speak really confidently about something that you are an expert in and you know that they don't know what they're talking about? Because I've had that experience a few times reading articles and whatnot, where it's like, for most things, I'm not an expert. There are relatively few things that I really know what I'm talking about, but I've read stuff where online and it's got through the editing process and it's been published as this is truth.
Yes.
And I've read these things and I'm like, I absolutely categorically know that is bullshit.
Yeah. 100%. You just realize, or the thing to realize is that that's me on most topics, right? So when I read someone else who's making naively confident predictions, and they're sprinkling in some data that seems plausible on a topic where I'm like, oh my God, you're getting this so wrong. I have to realize that's me when I'm thinking about and talking about almost everything, because I'm not an expert on almost anything. And it's also, I know that I can make a convincing sounding argument to a lay audience on almost anything. And this is actually an exercise. I have a video about this from ages ago, but I think that's also a good exercise to do, is like just argue 2 sides of an argument and see how easy it is to sound convinced and to add stories and anecdotes and data that support your point. It's really easy. It's really easy to make a convincing argument for almost anything. It's interesting. I think the thing that we keep coming back to here is just all of these ways to gain perspective on the situation. It's always about, well, instead of just being in the washing machine, being knocked about by whatever thoughts come up, by whatever stories and ideas come up, and buying into everything, being emotionally invested in everything we're talking about is just putting you slightly outside the washing machine, where you just realize, oh, this is happening. This is a game that's being played, and it's just more complicated. It's more complicated than buying into the first thought or first emotion that comes up.
So here's another layer to this. So everything we've spoken about so far has been about perspective. Now let's approach this from a slightly different angle. Let's say it's true. Yes. What you believe is true. Let's say we've got 10 years before the planet goes to extinction. And the question is this serving you? Is this thought, given that you don't actually know, is this ruminating, this anxiety, this thought train that you keep getting on, is it serving you in any way, shape or form? And is it making your life better in any way?
And is it making anyone else's life better? Because for me, this has always been part of it. I obviously want a good life for myself, but I also want to make a positive contribution somehow in the world. For me, that's one of the things that also really loosened the grip of my cynical mindset and my doomer thinking, was when I realized, like, I'm not making any positive contribution here whatsoever. Like you said, maybe, let's say 10 years from now, we all die from climate change or something, right? It's like me worrying about it for 10 years does absolutely nothing to improve the situation. And one of the things I learned to do is to pick my battles, and there's a meme that I really love that I found somewhere, is, it's like a picture of a Viking. It says, pick your battles. And it says, put some battles back. That's too many battles. That's still too many battles. Pick fewer battles. And this is basically what I learned to do, because I was generally worried. And I think this concerns a lot of people who are generally caring people, who are people who maybe have a lot of empathy. This might happen to liberal-leaning people a bit more, where you are worried about so many things and you almost feel like you have a duty to worry about these things. So you're worried about climate change, you're worried about social justice, you're worried about the economy, you're worried about things happening in your community, in your neighborhood, you're worried about violent crime, it's an endless list of things you're worried about that are all happening somewhere in the world, right? You're worried about some war that's happening on the other side of the world. And you feel like, well, but people are suffering, things are bad, like I have to worry about it. But the truth is, you don't. And you feel like, well, if I didn't worry about all this stuff, wouldn't that make me a selfish and bad person? My answer to that is, well, my answer for me is that since all of my worrying about all these issues isn't changing anything, I might as well not worry about them. What I can do, and what I think is a reasonable thing to do, is pick a battle. Pick one area of life where you want to make a positive contribution, and leave all the other stuff to other people. Because the thing is, so climate change is a huge problem, and huge numbers of people who are far more qualified than me are working on it. And maybe I can say, okay, I'm going to be on a plant-based diet so that I lower my own footprint. That's my contribution. That's it. And now don't worry about it. Leave the rest to the other people. Social justice issues across the world, people are on it. And I can choose one of those things. I could say, okay, I'm going to dedicate my life to doing something about climate change. Great. I make that my career. That's my contribution. I leave all the other stuff to other people. Now, for me, it means that I have to look at, what am I qualified to do? What am I good at? Where can I make a difference? The thing that I'm most driven to do and the thing that I'm most qualified to do is to help people kind of on a one-by-one basis, to help individuals, to help lift individuals out of their suffering, to help empower individuals so that they can then go and do whatever they want to do more effectively. Because look, this is one of the reasons we're talking about all this. Like, the doomer mindset is a huge obstacle to your own performance, your ability to succeed in the world, and your ability to make a difference in the world. If I can help you fix this, you will go on to make a positive difference in the world. And that's my contribution. That's what I'm focused on. I want to spend my life doing as much of this kind of good as possible, because this is the kind of good I'm good at doing. And I leave all the other problems to everyone else. And ultimately, that makes me way more effective because I'm actually making a difference in one area. And there's like, 8 billion or 9 billion of us? There's plenty of other people to take care of the other stuff. Don't worry about it. Humanity's track record of solving problems, by the way, amazing track record, okay? We probably got this. You can leave most of the stuff to everyone else. Pick one thing. And because I'm not burning all of my mental bandwidth and my emotional energy on worrying about 1,000 things that I'm not going to contribute to, it makes me more effective at making a difference in the one thing that I picked. And that's what I recommend everyone do. If you actually care, if you actually want to turn your care into effective help, pick a battle, pick one thing, and let everyone else worry about everything else.
What would you say to somebody I spoke to the other day who said they didn't want to have kids because they didn't want to bring a kid into this world?
I think this is a great example of the doomer mindset, right? You're so convinced that the world is a bad place that you're like, it would be awful to bring someone else into this world. What would I say to them? I'm not sure, because I don't want this to sound like an accusation. I think what's happening is that you're basically just projecting your own state onto your future child, which makes sense, right? It's like, well, if I'm miserable in this world, then probably my child is going to be miserable. Why would I do that to someone? So it's a very reasonable thing. And I would say, well, yes, this points to the more you allow yourself to have a good time here, the more that you live your life in such a way that you're like, this is good, this feels good. And this includes all the stuff we've talked about. Oh, my mind isn't the torture chamber anymore. And instead of worrying about 1,000 things, I'm making a positive contribution in one way, and that feels good too. The more you do that for yourself, the more you're like, hey, this life thing is great. And then it all of a sudden it seems like, if I can bring someone else into this and they can have this great experience I'm having, of course that'd be preferable. So it's really, I would say that's the task. That's the task here, especially if someone's saying this. I wonder if there is a wish there where you go, I would like to have children, and it feels like that would be a bad thing to do. Well, great. Let this be your motivation. This is the perfect example of this. Is basically the oxygen mask principle, where it can feel so selfish, but if you're in an airplane, the oxygen mask comes down, you put on your mask first before you help your child put on theirs, which might seem like, oh, this is so selfish. But if you pass out halfway through trying to help your child put on their oxygen mask, that's not very useful for anyone. And this is exactly that principle. You take care of yourself first, empower yourself, turn yourself into a better version of yourself. Prioritize a happier, more at peace, healthier, more effective version of yourself. And when you become that, even though that might seem totally selfish, it's like, oh, I'm just doing all this stuff for me so I feel good. Yes, do all this stuff for you so you feel good. It makes you a more effective human in the world, and all of a sudden having children seems like a good idea.
Such a great message there. And I think what underwrites it all is that what you see is your world is not necessarily the truth, essentially. Yes. What you see and what you believe is not necessarily what's actually happening. And I think it's really important just to be aware of the games that are being played and the traps that are being laid around you. Because with awareness, you can then start to question things and not take them at face value. And it's just good to understand why the world might appear to be a lot more negative than it actually is.
Yeah. So I think we can leave it at that, and I'd be very curious to hear what questions come up, what objections come up. And I'm very welcoming of those. I would love to see comments with questions and objections, and even tell me where I'm wrong, or tell me how this doesn't apply to you, or where you feel like, anything that makes you go, okay, what you guys are talking about seems good, but here's what's happening for me. Let us know. Let us know. I would love to know more about where people are at with this problem. Because like I said before, I think if we can help some people solve this problem, that is a huge contribution to humanity. It ripples out, right? So even if we can only help a few people with this, it's going to be well worth it. So feel free to send in your questions, your requests, your thoughts on this, and we might do a follow-up episode or make more content to answer those questions. All right, that concludes our conversation on cynicism, depression, and the doomer mindset. I hope you found this useful. And like I mentioned, I would love to hear from you. It's so useful for me to see questions and also see objections. Tell me where you think I'm wrong. Tell me where the solutions and ideas I propose don't land for you. And that will help me make more content on this and hopefully become more effective. The doomer mindset has become really common. A lot of people are convinced that they live in a cruel, awful world and that things keep getting worse. And the more people we can uplift out of that kind of thinking, the more effective agents for positive change we have going around in the world. This is a solvable problem, and I'm trying to do my part to solve it. And with your questions, with your feedback, with your interactions, you can help me do that. Also, just a quick note, there's a link in the description where you can sign up for my newsletter in case you want to be informed of future episodes and other content like this, and you don't want to rely on algorithms that often don't show you content even from people you're subscribed to. That is one way to stay in touch. So that's a link in the description available for you. And with that, that is all for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.